He stood over the polished mahogany casket, a single perfect tear tracing a path down his cheek. To the mourners gathered, Richard Davenport was the image of a grieving husband, heartbroken by the sudden loss of his beloved wife, Helena. But as he squeezed his mistress's hand behind his back, the tear wasn't for the woman he had just buried. It was a tear of triumph. He had played the part, endured the years, and now the grand prize was finally within reach, Helena's vast 8-figure fortune. He and Amber had it all planned out. But they never planned for Helena. They never imagined that from beyond the grave, the quiet woman they had so thoroughly underestimated had laid one final, devastating trap. What they found at the bank the next day wouldn't be their ticket to paradise, but a one-way ticket to a hell of their own making. The day of Helena Davenport's funeral was by all accounts a masterfully orchestrated affair. Held on a crisp Tuesday in late October, the air in Belmont, Massachusetts, carried the sweet, melancholic scent of decaying leaves. The service took place at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church, a Gothic stone structure whose stained glass windows cast fractured holy light onto the somber faces of Boston's elite. Richard Davenport, 52, stood at the front, his face a carefully constructed mask of sorrow. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly coiffed, his bespoke black suit tailored to hide the slight paunch he'd developed over years of fine dining and finer wine, all courtesy of his wife. He dabbed at his eyes with a silk handkerchief, his shoulders occasionally shuddering with a sob that sounded utterly convincing to those in the pews. He was a phenomenal actor. He had to be. Beside him, though, separated by a respectable foot of air, was Amber Scott. At 28, she was everything Helena hadn't been for the last decade, vibrant, overtly sensual, and hanging on Richard's every word. Today, she played the part of the family friend, a younger woman who had supposedly admired Eleanor greatly. Her black dress was demure, her makeup understated. Only Richard could see the flicker of triumphant fire deep in her emerald eyes. It was a look they had shared countless times over the past 2 years, a silent promise of the life that was about to begin. Eleanor Vance Davenport had been a quiet force, heiress to the Vance Tech components, fortune. She was a woman of intellect and grace, known more for her philanthropic work and her stunning private gardens than for any social flamboyance. She had been the stable, silent partner in their marriage, the financial bedrock upon which Richard built his identity as a consultant, a vague title that mostly involved networking at the country club and managing Eleanor's portfolio, often to his own benefit. Her death had been sudden, a brain aneurysm, the doctors said. No warning. One moment she was reading in her conservatory, the next she was gone. For Richard, the news delivered by a solemn doctor at the hospital had felt less like a tragedy and more like a starting pistol. After the funeral, the mourners convened at the Davenport estate, a sprawling 7-bedroom colonial mansion set on 3 acres of meticulously landscaped grounds. The house was Eleanor's domain, filled with her understated, expensive taste, antique furniture, original artwork, and first-edition books. As guests offered their condolences, Richard would nod, gravely accept their handshakes, and murmur, "She was my everything. I don't know how I'll go on." Amber, meanwhile, moved through the crowd with a practiced sympathy, refilling glasses and offering tissues. She'd offer a soft, "Eleanor was so good to me," to an elderly aunt, her voice catching just enough to be believable. Once the last of the guests had departed, leaving behind a house heavy with the scent of lilies and catered food, the facade dropped. The front door clicked shut and Amber practically melted into Richard's arms, her lips finding his in a hungry, desperate kiss. "We did it, Ricky," she whispered, her voice shedding its mournful tone and taking on a breathless excitement. "We're free." Richard held her tight, his hands roaming her back. The grief mask was gone, replaced by a smug proprietary grin. "Patience, my love. Patience is a virtue, and ours is about to be very, very well rewarded. He led her into the grand living room, past the towering portrait of Helena that hung over the marble fireplace. In the painting, Helena looked out with serene, intelligent eyes, a faint, almost knowing smile on her lips. For a fleeting moment, Richard felt a prickle of unease, a feeling he quickly dismissed as post-funeral jitters. "First thing tomorrow," he said, pouring them both a generous glass of 25-year-old Macallan Eleanor's finest. "We go to the bank. Morgan Stanley. I've already spoken to our private wealth manager, Peterson. He was very sorry for my loss, of course." Richard snorted. "He'll have all the paperwork ready. As the sole beneficiary, it should be a simple transfer of assets into my name." Amber's eyes glittered. "How much do you think it is?" "The total liquid amount." Richard swirled the amber liquid in his glass, savouring the moment. After selling off some of her stock positions last year, and with her personal savings and checking, I'd estimate somewhere in the ballpark of 12 million. That's not even touching the trust fund she inherited. Which is a bit more complicated, but the liquid cash, that's ours for the taking. He let out a low chuckle. $12,000, give or take. Amber's breath hitched. She threw her arms around his neck. "Oh, Ricky. The places we'll go, the things we'll buy. No more hiding, no more sneaking around." She pulled back her expression, turning serious. "First things first. This house has to go. It's her." She gestured vaguely at the elegant traditional decor. "I want something modern, glass and steel, an infinity pool, in Malibu." "Whatever you want, my darling Richard," said his voice smooth as honey. "Malibu, Monaco, the moon. It's all on the table now." They spent the evening planning their new life. They browsed yacht catalogues online, argued playfully over the colour of the Lamborghini Amber wanted, and sketched out a 6-month itinerary that started in the Seychelles and ended in the Swiss Alps. They drank the expensive scotch and made love on a Persian rug that had cost more than Richard's first car, all under the watchful gaze of the woman in the portrait. As Richard finally drifted off to sleep that night, with Amber curled beside him, he felt a profound sense of satisfaction. He had weathered the storm. He had played the long game, tolerated a passionless marriage for the security it brought, and found love, or what he called love, on the side. He had gotten away with it all. He was rich, he was free, and the future was a blank check. He never once considered the possibility that Eleanor, the quiet, unassuming woman he had so thoroughly betrayed, might have been playing a longer game than he was. The next morning, Richard awoke with a giddiness he hadn't felt since he was a boy on Christmas morning. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then the reality of his new life rushed in, and a wide grin spread across his face. Amber was already awake, humming in the ensuite bathroom. "Don't take too long, darling," he called out. "Destiny awaits." They dressed with the careful precision of people heading to a coronation. Richard chose a charcoal brioni suit, a crisp white shirt, and a power red tie. Amber wore a chic tailored cream pantsuit that screamed quiet luxury. They looked like a power couple, a vision of wealth and success. They skipped breakfast, too high on anticipation to eat. The drive to downtown Boston was a victory lap. Richard drove Eleanor's black Mercedes S-Class, the engine a low, contented purr. Amber had her hand on his thigh, her nails painted a defiant, celebratory crimson. "Think of it, Ricky," she said, looking out at the city skyline. "By lunchtime, we'll be multimillionaires. We can walk into any store, buy anything we want. It's not just about the money," Amber Richard said, trying to sound profound. "It's about the freedom, the recognition. I was always Eleanor Davenport's husband. Now I'll just be Richard Davenport, and I'll be Mrs. Amber Davenport," she added, squeezing his leg. "Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" "We'll give it a few months," Richard said quickly. For appearances, a year maybe. We have to look like we're grieving." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue, But it was a necessary part of the performance. They arrived at the towering glass and steel skyscraper that housed the Morgan Stanley offices. They took the elevator up to the 45th floor, to the serene and hushed world of private wealth management. The air was different up here, rarefied smelling of money and expensive cleaning products. A receptionist with a polite, impenetrable smile greeted them. "Mr. Davenport, we are so very sorry for your loss. Mr. Peterson is unavailable at the moment, but he's asked Mrs. Caldwell to meet with you. She is the branch manager and handled many of Mrs. Davenport's accounts directly. Please have a seat." Richard felt a flicker of annoyance. Peterson was his guy. Who was this Caldwell woman? Still a branch manager was a senior position. He nodded curtly and led Amber to a pair of plush leather chairs overlooking the Boston Harbor. A few minutes later, a woman in her late 50s approached them. She was impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit, her grey hair styled in a severe but elegant bob. Her expression was professional, but lacked the warm, sycophantic tone Richard was used to from financial advisors. "Mr. Davenport," she said, her voice cool and direct. "I'm Maria Caldwell. My deepest condolences on the passing of your wife. Helena was a client here for over 20 years. A remarkable woman." "Thank you, Maria," Richard said, extending a hand. "This is a dear friend, Amber Scott. She's here for support." Mrs. Caldwell gave Amber a brief, unreadable glance before her attention returned to Richard. "Of course. Please follow me." She led them not to a large, comfortable office, but to a small, impersonal meeting room with a glass table and 3 chairs. There was no offer of coffee or water. The atmosphere felt clinical, not celebratory. The first real seed of doubt began to sprout in Richard's mind. So Richard began trying to take charge of the meeting. "As I'm sure you know, I am the sole beneficiary of Eleanor's estate. I spoke to Peterson about beginning the process of consolidating her accounts and transferring the assets. I was hoping we could get the primary paperwork signed today." Mrs. Caldwell folded her hands on the table. She didn't open a folder or pull out a single form. "Mr. Davenport, your wife's finances were complex. While we at Morgan Stanley manage a significant portion of her investment portfolio, the disposition of her estate is not as simple as a direct transfer of assets." Richard's smile tightened. "Complex? What do you mean?" "It's a standard will. I get everything. I was her husband. That is a matter for her legal counsel to discuss with you," Mrs. Caldwell stated calmly. "Eleanor appointed a single executor for her will and a trustee for her financial affairs. That person is not with this bank." Amber, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "Who is it then? Who do we need to talk to, Mrs.?" Caldwell looked down at a notepad in front of her, though Richard suspected she already knew the name by heart. All of Mrs. Davenport's final affairs, including the execution of her will and the disbursement of any funds, are being handled exclusively by her personal attorney, Mr. Alistair Finch of Sterling and Finch, LLP. The name hit Richard like a splash of cold water. Alistair Finch. He was Eleanor's lawyer, a stiff, old-school attorney from a prestigious firm on Beacon Hill. Richard had met him twice, both times at charity galas. Finch had been polite but distant, with eyes that seemed to see right through Richard's charming facade. Eleanor had always insisted on using him for her personal legal matters, separate from the corporate lawyers Richard preferred. "Finch." Richard repeated his voice a little too loud. "Why would it all go through him? My name is on the accounts, jointly on some of them. Only the household checking account was joint, Mr. Davenport." Miss Caldwell corrected him gently but firmly. "It has a balance of $37,450.22. You have full access to that, of course. All other assets, the brokerage accounts, the money market funds, the bond portfolios, were solely in Eleanor's name. And her final directive, received and notarized 3 months ago, stipulates that upon her death, all control transfers to the executor, Mr. Finch, pending the official reading of the will. $37,000. The number was an insult. It wouldn't even cover one of Amber's shopping sprees. This is ridiculous, Richard sputtered. A bureaucratic delay. I'll call Alistair right now and get this sorted. I believe he is expecting your call, Mrs. Caldwell said, her expression unchanging. He left his card for you. She slid a heavy cream-coloured business card across the table. It felt like a calling card from the Grim Reaper. The walk back to the elevator was silent and heavy. The air of celebration had completely evaporated, replaced by a thick cloud of confusion and anger. Amber's hand was no longer on Richard's thigh. She stared out the window, her jaw tight. What the hell was that? "Ricky," she hissed as soon as the elevator doors closed, her voice a venomous whisper. "What is going on?" "It's nothing," Richard insisted, though his heart was starting to pound with anxiety. "It's just some legal red tape. Finch is an old dinosaur. He does everything by the book, page by page. He's probably just enjoying his power trip." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. Why would Helena, who valued efficiency, set up such a convoluted system? Why give total control to a lawyer instead of allowing a simple transfer to her husband? The portrait of Helena flashed in his mind's eye, that serene, knowing smile. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number on the card. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Sterling and Finch." "I need to speak to Alistair Finch. This is Richard Davenport. One moment, sir." After a brief pause, the man himself was on the line. His voice was exactly as Richard remembered, dry, precise, and devoid of warmth. "Richard, I was expecting you. My condolences." "Save it, Alistair." Richard snapped. "I was just at Morgan Stanley. They tell me you're holding all the cards. I'd like to know what's going on." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Indeed, these matters are best discussed in person. Can you and Miss Scott be at my office at 3 p.m. today? We can proceed with the reading of Eleanor's last will and testament then." The inclusion of Amber's name was a deliberate, calculated strike. Finch knew. He knew everything. The confidence Richard had felt just an hour ago was now a distant memory, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The game had changed, and he didn't even know the new rules. The offices of Sterling and Finch, LLP, were the physical embodiment of old money and unshakable legal authority. Located in a historic brownstone on Beacon Hill, the interior was a world of dark mahogany, brass fixtures, and the faint, pleasant smell of old books and leather. It was designed to intimidate, to make clients feel that the weight of centuries of legal precedent was on their side, or in Richard's case, arrayed against him. Richard and Amber were shown into a large corner office that overlooked the Massachusetts State House. Bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound legal volumes. A grandfather clock ticked solemnly in the corner, marking the seconds with an unnerving gravity. Alistair Finch sat behind a massive oak desk. He was a tall, slender man in his late 60s, with a mane of white hair and piercing blue eyes behind gold-rimmed spectacles. He rose as they entered, his movements precise and economical. "Richard, Miss Scott, please sit." He gestured to 2 wingback chairs facing his desk. He didn't offer a handshake. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Amber shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her expensive pantsuit suddenly feeling like a costume. Richard, trying to reclaim some semblance of control, leaned forward. "Alistair, let's dispense with the theatrics. Just tell me what this is all about. Helena and I had a simple arrangement. I'm her husband. I'm her beneficiary. What is there to discuss?" Finch looked at him over the top of his glasses. Helena was a brilliant woman, Richard. She was many things, but she was never simple. And neither are her final wishes. He slid a thick, bound document across the desk. "This is Eleanor's last will and testament, signed and witnessed 6 weeks ago. She made some significant revisions from her previous versions." Richard's stomach clenched. 6 weeks ago. That was right after their secret trip to St. Bart's, a trip he'd told Helena was a business development retreat. Someone must have seen them. Someone must have told her. As Executor Finch continued his voice, a dispassionate monotone, "It is my duty to read the relevant portions to you." He cleared his throat and began to read. "I, Eleanor Vance Davenport, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." Finch skipped through the legal preamble. "To my husband, Richard Davenport, I leave the following." Richard held his breath. Amber leaned forward, her eyes fixated on the lawyer. "I bequeath our primary residence at 142 Chestnut Hill Lane, Belmont, Massachusetts, and all of its contents to him for the duration of his natural life." Richard let out a half-breath of relief. The house. At least he got the house. It was worth at least $8 million on its own. Finch continued, "This bequest is subject to the following strict conditions. First, Richard must continue to reside in the house as his sole and primary residence. He may not sell, lease, or take out any further mortgage against the property. Second, all property taxes, maintenance, and upkeep, estimated to be approximately $250,000 per annum, must be paid by him from his own funds. The estate will not cover these costs." Richard's relief vanished. $250,000 a year. His consulting business barely cleared a tenth of that. The house wasn't a gift. It was an anchor. Finch didn't pause. "Furthermore, I bequeath to my husband, Richard Davenport, a personal stipend to assist with his living expenses." Here it was, the money. "This stipend shall be in the amount of $2,000 per month." The number hung in the air so small it was laughable. $2,000 a month. It was less than their wine budget. Amber let out a small, strangled gasp. "2,000, she blurted out. "That's it." Finch looked at her as if noticing a fly in the room. "Please allow me to finish, Miss Scott." He turned his gaze back to Richard, who was pale and slack-jawed. "This stipend is also conditional. It is payable only so long as Richard remains unmarried and is not cohabitating with another partner. Should he remarry or cohabitate, both the stipend and his right to reside in the house are immediately forfeit. The property would then be sold, with all proceeds directed to the Vance Trust." It was a cage, a gilded, perfectly constructed cage. Eleanor had chained him to her memory to her house and forced him into a life of solitude. He was being punished, and she was using the very things he coveted: the house, the money as the instruments of his punishment. "The rest of it," Richard said, his voice hoarse. "The portfolio, the stocks, the cash, the 12 million. "Ah, yes," Finch said, turning a page. "The bulk of my estate, including all liquid assets, stocks, bonds, and holdings, currently managed by Morgan Stanley, valued as of this morning at approximately $4.2 million, along with the assets from my inherited family trust, valued at an additional $45 million, are to be consolidated into a single entity." Finch paused for dramatic effect, looking directly at Richard. "This entity is to be known as the Eleanor Vance Foundation. It is a charitable foundation dedicated to providing shelter, legal aid, and educational grants for women and children who are victims of domestic and emotional abuse." The room fell silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. A charity for abused women. The irony was so thick, so potent, it was suffocating. She had given it all away. "The Foundation," Finch continued, his voice unwavering, "will be managed by a board of directors, which I will chair. The Foundation's charter explicitly forbids any board member, employee, or associate from having any personal or financial relationship with Richard Davenport." He closed the document with a soft thud. "That, in essence, is the will. You get the house and a small allowance provided you live alone, like a monk. Everything else, the life you envisioned for yourselves, goes to help the very type of women you, Miss Scott, helped my client become a victim of." The last part was delivered with the slightest edge, the first crack in his professional veneer. Amber shot to her feet, her face a mask of fury. This is insane. She was clearly not of sound mind. We'll contest this. We'll get our own lawyer. Finch leaned back in his chair, a look of mild pity on his face. You are welcome to try Miss Scott. However, you have no legal standing, as you are not mentioned in the will. As for Richard, he can contest, of course. But Helena was very thorough. Over the last 3 months, she underwent 3 separate psychological evaluations by 3 different leading psychiatrists. All of them have provided sworn affidavits testifying to her lucidity, intelligence and firm state of mind right up until the day she died. She also made a video recording here in this office explaining her reasoning in calm, clear detail. Any judge would find this will to be ironclad. Contesting it would only drain Richard of what little resources he has left. Richard sat frozen, the world tilting on its axis. He looked at Amber, her face contorted with rage, and then at Finch, the stoic messenger of his doom. He saw his future flash before his eyes, a lonely man in a cavernous house he couldn't afford, haunted by the ghost of the woman he had wronged. Why Richard whispered the word barely audible. Why would she do this? Alistair Finch took off his glasses and began polishing them with a cloth. Eleanor was a good person, Richard, but she was not a fool. She believed in consequences. She once told me, people should get exactly what they deserve. It appears she has made sure of that. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. My assistant will validate your parking. The words were the final, dismissive insult. They stumbled out of the office, the grandfather clock seeming to tick louder, mocking their defeat. The life they had dreamed of was gone, replaced by a nightmare from which there was no waking up. The drive back to Belmont was a cocoon of toxic silence. Richard gripped the steering wheel of the Mercedes, his knuckles white. The car, which had felt like a symbol of his victory, that morning, now felt like a borrowed costume he would soon have to return. Amber sat rigid in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her body radiating a cold fury. The moment the front door of the mansion closed behind them, the silence shattered. A stipend! A goddamn stipend! Amber's voice was shrill, echoing in the grand foyer. $2,000 a month, Ricky. My monthly Amex bill is 5 times that, and I've been holding back. What do you want me to do? Amber. Richard shot back, his voice ragged with desperation. Did you not hear the man? It's ironclad psychiatrist's video recordings. She boxed me in from every conceivable angle. You let her do this, Amber shrieked, whirling to face him. Her face was flushed, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the raw panic in her eyes. For 2 years, you told me how smart you were, how you had everything under control, how you were managing her finances. How did you not see this coming? How could you be so stupid? The word stupid stung Richard more than anything else. It was the one thing he prided himself on not being. She was quiet. She was reading her damn books and tending to her roses. How was I supposed to know she was secretly plotting the financial equivalent of a nuclear strike? He ran his hands through his hair, pacing the black and white marble floor. The house? We can't sell it. We can't rent it. We have to pay $250,000 a year just to keep it. Where am I supposed to get that kind of money? That's your problem, Amber spat. You're the one who has to live here alone like some kind of sad old hermit to get your little pocket money. Where does that leave me? I'm not putting my life on hold to be your secret girlfriend on the side, sneaking in and out so you don't lose your precious allowance. The dream of Malibu and infinity pools had curdled into this ugly, squalid reality. Their shared future was built on the foundation of Eleanor's fortune. Without it, there was nothing holding them together but a shared crime of betrayal, and that was quickly turning to resentment. We'll find a way, Richard said, his voice lacking any conviction. I'll get a lawyer, a better one. There has to be a loophole. But the search for a loophole proved to be a fast track to more despair. The next day, Richard made an appointment with a notoriously aggressive estate lawyer named Marcus Thorne. After reviewing a copy of the will and Finch's summary, Thorne leaned back in his leather chair, a cynical smile on his face. "Mr. Davenport," he said, steepling his fingers, "your late wife didn't just close the door on you. She bolted it, chained it, and bricked it up from the other side. The conditions, the celibacy clause as we call it, are unusual, but they are not illegal. They are what's known as a restraint on marriage clause, and while some are struck down, this one is cleverly tied to the stipend and residency, not the inheritance itself. It's designed to influence your behavior, which is permissible. She's not saying you can't remarry, just that you'll be homeless and broke if you do." Thorne tapped the document. "And these psych evaluations, the video statement, forget it. You'd spend 100 grand just to get laughed out of court. My advice, take the deal. It's a bad one, but it's the only one on the table." Richard left Thorne's office feeling even more hopeless. The cage was real and the walls were closing in. The following week was a slow-motion collapse. The first bill to arrive was for the catering at the funeral reception, $500. Then came the invoice from the church and the funeral home, another $32,000. Richard had assumed the estate would cover these expenses. He called Finch only to be coolly informed that funeral expenses were traditionally borne by the surviving spouse. He was forced to pay out of the joint account, the one Mrs. Caldwell had mentioned. In a matter of days, the $37,450 balance had been cut in half. Amber watched all this with a growing sense of detachment and disgust. The man she had seen as a powerful, wealthy benefactor was rapidly revealing himself to be a panicked, flailing man with dwindling resources. The luxury cars in the driveway were registered to Helena. The credit cards in Richard's wallet were all tied to accounts that were now part of the foundation. His entire lifestyle had been a performance funded by his wife, and the show was over. Their arguments grew more frequent and more venomous. "You have to sell your watch," Amber demanded one evening, pointing at the Patek Philippe on his wrist. It had been a gift from Helena on their 10th anniversary. "It's worth maybe 60,000, Amber. That's not even 3 months of upkeep on this place." "It's a start. What about the art? That ugly painting over the fireplace, it's part of the contents of the house. I can't sell it. Remember. It belongs to the house, and the house belongs to me, only as long as I follow her insane rules." They were trapped in a museum of their own failure, surrounded by priceless objects they couldn't touch. Amber started spending less time at the mansion. She made excuses. She needed to see her friends. She had appointments. Richard knew she was distancing herself, testing the waters of a life without him. He felt a desperate need to hold on to her, the last remnant of the dream he'd lost. "Just be patient," he begged her one night. "Let me figure this out. Once I get the first stipend check, things will stabilize." Amber just looked at him with cold pity. $2,000, Ricky. That's what this whole grand affair has been reduced to. I can make more than that in a weekend waitressing. Is that what you want for me?" He had no answer. The foundation of lies and entitlement they had built their relationship on was crumbling, and Richard was beginning to realize that without the promise of money, he had nothing to offer her. He was no longer the charming, powerful man with a rich wife. He was just a middle-aged man in a dead-end marriage, and now he was just a middle-aged man in a dead-end life. The rust was setting in, and the decay was spreading faster than he could have ever imagined. Just when Richard believed things couldn't possibly get worse, the phone call came. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after the reading of the will. He was sitting in Eleanor's cavernous home office, staring at a stack of freshly arrived bills, landscaping pool, maintenance security services, that totaled more than his first 2 years' worth of stipend payments. The $37,000 in the joint account was nearly gone. He felt a knot of pure acid panic in his gut. The phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. He answered, hoping it might be a client for his moribund consulting business. "Is this Richard Davenport?" a crisp, professional voice asked. "It is. Mr. Davenport, my name is Arthur Cole. I'm calling from the Commercial Loans Division of Cambridge Fidelity Bank. I'm calling regarding the outstanding balance on the line of credit held by your late wife, Eleanor Vance Davenport." Richard's blood ran cold. Line of credit, I don't think so. Helena didn't borrow money. She was the bank. You must have the wrong person. There was a rustling of papers on the other end. Sir, I can assure you I do not. We have a business credit line in the name of E. Vance Holdings LLC, a sole proprietorship registered to your wife. Over the last 4 months, she drew down the full extent of the credit line. How much, Richard asked, his voice a dry whisper. The total outstanding principal is $5 million, Mr. Cole said, as casually as if he were quoting the price of a coffee. $5,000. The first interest payment is now 30 days past due. Richard felt the room spin. $5 million. It was an impossible number. Helena, the most fiscally conservative person he knew, taking out a massive loan. It made no sense. Where did it go? Richard demanded. What was it for? There are no new assets, no property purchases. Our privacy agreement with the client prevents me from discussing the specific use of the funds. Mr. Davenport Cole replied smoothly. However, I can tell you that the loan is secured. Secured? Secured by what? Mr. Cole paused. It's secured by her primary investment portfolio, the one managed by Morgan Stanley. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening snap. The portfolio, the $14.2 million that now formed the bulk of the Eleanor Vance Foundation. That portfolio is now part of a charitable foundation, Richard said, desperation creeping into his voice. It's untouchable. Not to a primary loanholder, it isn't. Mr. Cole corrected him. The loan agreement predates the formation of the foundation. The foundation inherited the assets, which means it also inherited the debt secured against them. As the executor of the estate, Mr. Finch has been notified. We will be drawing our payments directly from the interest and dividends generated by that portfolio until the principal and accrued interest are paid in full. Richard did the math in his head, his mind reeling. A $5 million loan. Even at a favorable interest rate, the payments would be enormous. The income generated by the foundation's assets, the money that was supposed to go to abused women, would instead be diverted to a bank for years, possibly decades, to pay off a mysterious debt. But the true horror dawned on him a second later. The foundation's income was crippled. What if it wasn't enough? What happens if the portfolio's returns don't cover the loan payments? Richard asked, dreading the answer. In the event of a shortfall, Cole said, his voice cold and clinical, the bank is legally entitled to begin liquidating the underlying assets to cover the debt, piece by piece if necessary. Helena hadn't just given her money away, she had booby-trapped it. She had created a phantom debt that would slowly devour her own fortune from the inside out, leaving the foundation a hollow shell. But why? It was an act of financial self-immolation. It was chaos. He hung up the phone, his hand trembling. He immediately called Alistair Finch. Did you know about this, Richard? Yelled, dispensing with any pleasantries. This $5 million loan, I was made aware of it last week. Yes, Finch replied, his tone as placid as ever. Cambridge Fidelity Bank sent over the paperwork, and you didn't think to tell me. This changes everything, does it? Richard Finch asked coolly. It has no bearing on your stipend or your residency in the house. It is a matter for the foundation's board and the bank. It does not concern you. It concerns me. Richard insisted, pacing frantically. She took out a $5 million loan and it just vanished. Where did the money go, Alistair? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Finch finally spoke, his voice was different. It held a note of something Richard couldn't quite identify. Not pity, but perhaps a kind of weary finality. I cannot tell you, Richard. Eleanor's instructions on that matter were explicit. But I will offer you a piece of unsolicited advice. Stop digging. You will not like what you find. The line went dead. That night, Amber came home late. She had been out with friends, she said, but her hair was too perfect, her smile too bright. Richard knew she was already moving on, detaching herself from his sinking ship. He confronted her in the living room. the portrait of Helena, looking down on them. "I have to tell you something," he said, his voice heavy. He explained the phone call from the bank, the $5 million debt, the lien against the foundation. He laid out the bizarre, self-destructive financial puzzle Helena had created. He had expected her to be angry to panic. Instead, she just looked at him with an expression of utter finality. "So let me get this straight," she said, her voice flat. "The money we were supposed to get is not only gone, but it's been secretly mortgaged. The foundation she set up to spite us is basically bankrupt. It seems so. It will be eaten alive by this debt." Amber let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. My God, she really did think of everything. She shook her head, a slow, deliberate motion. "You know, for a while I was angry. Now I'm almost impressed. She beat you, Ricky. She beat us both completely and utterly." She looked around the opulent room at the furniture, and the art, and the silent grand piano. This was all a mirage, wasn't it? This whole life. And you were so busy enjoying the view, you never realized it was all about to disappear. She walked over to him and placed a hand on his cheek. Her touch was cold. "I'm sorry, Ricky, but I can't do this. I can't be tied to this." She gestured around the room at the invisible chains that now bound him. "To you." "Amber, don't," he pleaded. We can't do anything," she interrupted, her voice firm. "It's over. The dream is dead." She turned and walked towards the door without looking back. "Where are you going?" he called out, his voice cracking. She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. "To find a life that's real. I suggest you try and do the same if you can figure out how." And with that, she was gone. The door clicked shut, the sound echoing through the vast, empty house. Richard Davenport was alone with the bills, the conditions, the ghost of his wife, and the terrifying mystery of a $5 million debt that had sealed his fate. The final nail had been hammered into his coffin, and he hadn't even seen the hammer coming. The week after Amber left was a descent into a new circle of hell for Richard. The silence in the mansion was no longer peaceful. It was a living entity, vast and oppressive. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside seemed to mock him. He was the king of a castle he couldn't afford and couldn't leave a prisoner in his own home. The financial reality was closing in like a vice. His last credit card was declined at the grocery store. A bright orange notice of impending utility shut-off was taped to his front door. He was forced to sell his Patek Philippe watch, just as Amber had suggested, but the $62,000 he got for it felt like throwing a bucket of water on a forest fire. It would cover the property tax for 1/4 and then he'd be back at zero. Desperation gnawed at him. Where did the $5 million go? The question became an obsession, the only mystery he felt he could solve. He couldn't accept that Helena had simply vaporized it. She was too meticulous. There had to be a trail, a record, something. Maybe she'd hidden it. Maybe there was a secret account, a safety deposit box, a last little nest egg he could claim. Hope, however irrational, was the only thing he had left. He began to tear the house apart, not in a frantic rage, but with the methodical desperation of a treasure hunter. He started in Eleanor's home office, the room he had just been in, when the fateful call came. It was a space he'd rarely entered when she was alive. It was her sanctuary, filled with books on botany, art history, and classic literature. He went through every desk drawer, every filing cabinet. He found old bank statements, tax returns from a decade ago, warranties for kitchen appliances. Nothing. He checked between the pages of every book, hoping for a hidden key or a slip of paper. He found only pressed flowers and old bookmarks. Days turned into a week. He grew gaunt, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He neglected to shave. He looked less like the lord of the manor and more like its resident ghoul. Finally, his search led him to the back of her walk-in closet. Tucked away behind a row of winter coats, He found a small locked safe set into the wall, one he never knew existed. His heart leapt. This had to be it. He spent the better part of a day trying to guess the combination: her birthday, their anniversary, her mother's birthday. Nothing worked. In a fit of frustration, he took a heavy crowbar from the garage and went at the safe, chipping away at the plaster and denting the metal door until, with a final wrenching groan, it broke open. Inside, there was no cash, no jewelry, no bearer bonds. There was only a single slim leather-bound ledger and a thick cream-coloured envelope with his name Richard written on it in Eleanor's elegant, familiar script. His hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside was a letter several pages long, written on the same heavy stationery as the will. He sat down on the floor of the closet, surrounded by Eleanor's clothes that still faintly smelled of her lavender perfume, and began to read. My dearest Richard, if you are reading this, it means your desperation has finally outweighed your pride, and you have found my little secret. I imagine you are alone now. I doubt Miss Scott possessed the character to endure a life without the financial lubrication she so desires. You must have so many questions. Why the convoluted will? Why the cage? And most of all, the $5 million. Let me put your mind at ease. It is not a puzzle for you to solve, but a statement for you to understand. I knew Richard. I've known for 19 months. I knew about Miss Scott from the very beginning. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the late-night texts you thought you were hiding, the sudden business trips to sunny locales, the scent of a perfume that was not mine on your suit jackets? You were never as clever a liar as you believed yourself to be. You were simply married to a woman who chose for a time to be a quiet observer. My first instinct was anger. My second was heartbreak. I thought of confronting you, of divorcing you, of exposing you to our friends and family for the faithless, greedy man you had become. But I realized that would only give you a different kind of freedom. You would have fought for half of everything, and you likely would have won. You would have taken your winnings and built a new life on the ashes of ours, and you would have felt no remorse. It wouldn't have been justice. It would have been a transaction. So I chose a different path. I decided to give you exactly what you wanted. My money and the life that came with it. But I also decided to give you exactly what you deserved. Nothing. The will was the easy part. The kill, as you probably call it. Tying you to this house alone with just enough money to survive but not to live was a fitting punishment for a man who values appearances above all else. You have the stage. Richard, but the audience has gone home, and you have no lines to say. But the masterpiece, if I may be so bold, was the debt. That, my dear, is where the $5 million went. It didn't vanish. I gave it away. Richard's eyes scanned down to the ledger. He opened it. It was meticulously detailed. Page after page listed wire transfers, dates, amounts, receiving entities. The first transfers were small, a few $1,000s here and there. Then they grew. He recognized the names. They were all women's shelters, legal aid societies, non-profits that specialized in helping women escape abusive situations, the very charities her foundation was supposed to support. The letter continued. You see, I couldn't simply endow the foundation upon my death. You and your lawyers would have found a way to contest it, to claim I was manipulated or unwell. So I started funding it while I was alive. Secretly, I established Evance Holdings LLC, not to acquire anything, but to liquidate. I took out the loan from Cambridge Fidelity, a bank we never used, and I funneled that money, every last cent, into the nascent infrastructure of my true legacy. The final transfer for the remaining $1 million was made the day before I died. I used the loan to make the donations, and I used my assets as collateral. I effectively gave my money away twice. The foundation inherits the assets, yes, but it also inherits the colossal debt that I took on to build it in the first place. The income it generates won't be going to new programs for years. It will be going to a bank to pay back the money I already gave away. It is poetic, don't you think? You wanted my fortune. but you inspired me to give it away to women you would see as victims. In doing so, I created a debt that ultimately neuters the very foundation set up in my name. I burned it all to the ground, Richard. I burned it all down so that you could never have it. The money is gone. It was spent helping people you would never deign to notice. It has already done its good work. What remains is an illusion, a portfolio that does nothing but pay a debt, a house you cannot leave, a life you cannot live. You are left with exactly what you brought to this marriage yourself. I hope for your sake you find some value in that. I, however, could not. Goodbye, Richard. Helena, Richard, let the letter fall from his hands. The air in the closet felt thick, unbreathable. It wasn't chaos. It was a plan. A scorched earth policy of breathtaking genius and cruelty. She hadn't just outplayed him, she had rewritten the entire game, revealed him as a pawn, and then kicked the board over. He looked at the ledger, at the names of the shelters and aid societies. He thought of the women and children Eleanor's money had already helped. His betrayal hadn't just led to his own ruin. It had been the catalyst for a massive act of secret charity. He was the villain in a story where he thought he was the hero, and the person he had victimized had turned his sin into her salvation and his damnation. He stumbled out of the closet and into the master bedroom. He caught his reflection in the large vanity mirror, a haggard, defeated stranger. The smug, confident man who had stood over his wife's casket was gone forever. In his place was a ghost, haunted not by the dead, but by the living consequences of his own greed. He had cashed in only to find the bank was empty, and he owed a debt that could never be repaid. The aftermath was a quiet, suffocating ruin. The first stipend check arrived, a crisp $200,000 that felt more like an insult than a lifeline, just enough to keep him chained to the grand, empty mausoleum he was forced to call home. His old life evaporated. The whispers about Eleanor's will had made him a pariah in the circles he once commanded. His calls to former contacts went unanswered. The final severance came a few weeks later. Richard watched from a window as Amber returned not for him, but for her things. With cool efficiency, she loaded her designer life into a waiting town car, never once looking back. She was on her way to a new benefactor, leaving Richard alone in the wreckage. The house became his prison, its silence a constant reminder of his failure. He would often stand before Eleanor's portrait, no longer seeing the passive wife he thought he knew, but the brilliant strategist who had dismantled his world. He had fatally underestimated her, and this house was his monument to that folly. The final twist of the knife was delivered in a phone call from Alistair Finch. The lawyer informed him with a tone of professional satisfaction that the Eleanor Vance Foundation had just made its first grant. After paying the installment on the massive debt, the remaining income had funded a new wing at a women's shelter. The Vance Wing, Finch called it. Richard hung up the phone and stared out at the once perfect gardens, now overgrown and choked with weeds. The punishment was complete. It wasn't the loss of the money that broke him. It was the chilling knowledge that his greed had been the catalyst for her greatest act of charity. Eleanor had stripped him of everything and left him with the one thing he could not escape himself. It was a life sentence, and so Richard Davenport was left to live out his days as a ghost in his own life, a living testament to the old saying, "Be careful what you wish for." Eleanor's revenge was not a fiery explosion, but a slow, cold burn. She proved that the most devastating traps aren't the ones that kill you, but the ones that force you to live with the person you've become. A story of greed, betrayal, and the quiet, meticulous justice served from beyond the grave. What did you think of Eleanor's ultimate plan? Was it a stroke of genius or a step too far? Who was the real winner in the end? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story of poetic justice captivated you, please give this video a like, Share it with someone who loves a good tale of twists and turns. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening.